Last time, on Blind Date, Carrie woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. It was the next morning after the night of his blind date. It was his date, Amanda, calling him. But when Carrie answers the phone, she says, "It's me, Mandy." Why had Carrie changed her name to Amanda? She asks why he never showed up to her house. He avoids answering the question. He tells her he wants to make it up to her. He asks her for her address again. How had he gotten the wrong address and name? She tells Carrie that her first day at Revere High is tomorrow, and asks him if he could meet her in the morning to show her around the school. Of course, Carrie agrees. After their phone call, Carrie gets another creepy phone call. Someone's still trying to scare him. He wondered if it was really Sharon calling him. Later that morning, Carrie's dad shows him the newspaper article about Sal's broken leg. He's relieved to see that his name isn't mentioned in the paper. Before his dad leaves for work, he tells him that Josh and him are going out to play a one-on-one basketball match at the courts. That afternoon, as Carrie and Josh played basketball, Josh asks Carrie about his blind date. Carrie tells him that the date got postponed. Josh teases him for chickening out. Carrie knows he doesn't believe him, but he didn't want to tell the truth. Their game gets interrupted though, as 4 guys from the football team come running up on them. They confront Carrie for showing up at the courtyard when they clearly warned him not to come around. He tries to talk his way out of it, but it was no use. Carrie gets the crap beaten out of him by the 4 football players. They then threaten Josh to keep his mouth shut about what just happened. The next morning, Carrie finds a beautiful but strangely out-of-place girl waiting next to his locker. It was Mandy, and they finally got to meet. Carrie felt a little embarrassed to meet her after what the 4 football players had done to his face. As they walked around the school, Mandy was oddly clingy to him, keeping very close and always touching on him. Carrie noticed other students staring at them as they walked the halls. He asked her what school she went to before Revere. She acted distracted and told him she went to a very private school that he wouldn't be familiar with. Just before the bell rings for class, Carrie asks her if she would go to the autumn dance with him. She excitedly says yes. Then Carrie goes to open his locker, and at first sight, he thinks he sees blood all over the books in his locker. Although the blood turns out to be just red paint, Carrie now has to see the principal to get all new textbooks. The principal asks Carrie plenty of questions about the fight and the vandalism of his locker. Carrie tells him that he doesn't know who did it, and as far as the fight, it was something he had to handle on his own. The principal also tells Carrie that Sal is now awake from his coma. Carrie says that's great news. After leaving the office, Carrie bumps into Sharon. He asks her how Sal is doing, then he asks her about the strange phone calls. She seems to act like she doesn't know what he's talking about. He gets no answers from Sharon, and she ends up running off to class. That night, Carrie has a dream about him and his brother Donald riding in a canoe, a dream he had had before. In the dream, Carrie and Donald are happy, but Carrie knows there's a waterfall coming up ahead. But Donald isn't aware. Just before they go over the edge, Carrie is woken up by the ringing phone. It was Josh. He called to ask Carrie how his day went with Mandy. After he tells Josh about his day and gets off the phone, he falls back down on his bed and tries to go back to sleep. As he laid there, he began to think about Mandy. As he recapped their morning, he realized something strange about her. Mandy had no backpack or any books that she carried with her, not even a pocketbook. He eventually falls asleep. The next morning, Carrie finds his father waiting for him downstairs. He tells Carrie that he got a call this morning. His dad is acting very strange as he talked. Carrie waited suspensefully for his father to tell him what was going on. "Carrie," his father said, "your brother Donald, he's escaped." Chapter 9. Escaped? From where? Carrie realized for the first time he didn't know where his brother was. How could that be? Had he been living in a dream world for an entire year? "I guess we've all been living in a dream world," his father said, echoing Carrie's thoughts. "I tried to protect you. The doctor said I should." "Protect me from what?" Carrie asked. "From Donald?" His father didn't answer. He walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a pitcher of orange juice, and poured Carrie a glass. Carrie took the glass from his father's hand and took a long, cold sip. The juice tasted bitter, and pulp stuck in his throat. He took another bitter sip to wash it down. "Well, Dad," he started, but his father had returned to the living room. "Is Donald coming home?" Carrie asked. Lieutenant Hart paced back and forth in the narrow room, rubbing his chin, lost in a turmoil of thoughts. "Come on, Dad," Carrie demanded, trying to get through to his father. "You got to tell me now. You really don't have a choice, do you?" "The doctors, they all thought you'd remember by now," his father said, avoiding his eyes. "It would have been easier, I suppose." He turned to face his son. "Do you remember anything at all?" Carrie closed his eyes. "No, Not much. What do you mean, not much? Lieutenant Hart demanded. Does that mean you remember something? Headlights, Carrie said. I see headlights. That's all, Dad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, too, his father said quietly. I'm just a cop. Well, then you're used to delivering bad news, Carrie said with a flash of anger revealed in his voice. Was it anger, or just impatience to know what no one would talk to him about for so many months? Hey, you got no cause to snap at me, fella, Lieutenant Hart said. I've only tried to do what's right. It hasn't been easy, especially with your mother gone, but I don't complain. When you get to be a cop, you see that there's two sides to life, like two sides of a coin. There's the bright side, and there's the dark side. Carrie sat down on the couch. He realized his father must really be upset. He'd never heard him launch into such philosophy before. His father babbled on about the light side and the dark side, and how one side can overwhelm the other side, and how Carrie had retreated into one side when the other side got to be too much. Carrie didn't really hear all the words. His mind was spinning. His father's voice floated nearby, then drifted away as Carrie's own thoughts broke into his consciousness. He thought about how much he had missed Donald, how much he had relied on his older brother, how much his brother's encouragement had meant to him, and how badly he had felt when Donald had become displeased or had criticized him. Donald had been the most important person in his life. How could he not know where Donald was? How could he not care? At least that's what the doctors think, his father said. But now, of course, all that has changed. He stared at Carrie from across the room. The gray morning light filtered through the window, casting more shadows than light. What? Carrie struggled to hear his father. There was a fluttering in his ears, like the flapping of bird wings. Listen, Carrie, with Donald escaped, I got no choice. I've got to tell you a little. It isn't going to be easy for you, but... Lieutenant Hart started to sit down on the couch next to Carrie, but the phone rang. Carrie jumped up, but his father got to the phone first. Hello? His eyes opened wide, then returned to narrow slits. He stood holding the receiver in silence for a few seconds, then replaced it angrily. Who was it? Carrie asked. Some girl, probably a friend of yours, Lieutenant Hart said, easing himself back onto the couch. She started to say something, but when she realized it was me, she hung up. He groaned. His back must have been giving him pain. Probably Sharon calling to give him a cheerful morning death threat, Carrie thought. Look, Dad, Carrie said impatiently, whatever you've got to tell me, just tell me. You're only making it worse by dragging it out like this. Making it worse? Lieutenant Hart's face twisted into an ironic smile. Oh boy. He seemed to drift away again. Even though he was sitting next to Carrie on the low couch, he was miles away. The fluttering left Carrie's ears. Now the silence seemed crushingly loud. Say something, Dad. Say something. There was a car accident, Lieutenant Hart said flatly, staring at his shiny black police shoes. I knew it, Carrie cried. The headlights. His father got up and walked over to the window. Come on, fella. Don't interrupt. Let me just tell it. Make it a little bit easier for me, okay? Sorry, Carrie said. He was as surprised about his outburst as his father. Why had he done that? He hadn't known it. He had no memory of a car accident. Why was he so quick to say that he had? It was a little over a year ago, in July. You were all on vacation. There was no school. His father was staring out the window as he spoke. The gray morning light washed over him, turning him gray, spreading gloom instead of warmth. It was late at night. There were 3 of you in the front seat of our car. Do you remember the car? Carrie thought hard. No. I'm not going to give you details, Carrie. I'm only going to tell you enough so you can deal with Donald's escape. Okay, Carrie said, unable to hide his impatience, even though he could see his father was struggling with every word. Silence. A car rumbled by, tires spinning over pebbles in the road as it climbed the steep hill. It was late at night. Did I say that? Oh well, it doesn't really matter. There was an accident, a collision, down at the foot of the hills, on Edge Creek by the turn. Donald's girlfriend was sitting in the middle, between you and Donald. It was a bad crash. Her head hit the mirror. Then there was a second jolt, and Carrie waited. His father took a deep breath. He was a policeman, but he never got used to death. The girl was killed, he said quickly. And Donald? Carrie asked, his voice gurgling up weakly from deep in his throat, his hands ice cold. Donald couldn't accept it. He cracked. But he was alive? Carrie demanded. Yeah, untouched practically, Lieutenant Hart replied. seeming surprised by the question. So are you. Just a few cuts. That scar over your eyebrow. Carrie's hand went up to the scar. It was still a little tender. He never paid attention to it, except when his comb slipped or he accidentally scratched it. But Donald couldn't accept it that his girlfriend was dead. He cracked. He just snapped. We had no choice. We had to send him away. To a hospital. You know, a place for mental patients. That's where his brother was? In a mental hospital? You, don't remember any of this? His father asked cautiously. No, Carrie muttered. No. Headlights. Just headlights. Nothing. Well, I've told you most of it. Enough, I guess, Lieutenant Hart said, leaning on the window sill, staring out into the gray morning. Donald's been in the hospital ever since. I tried to see him, but the docs don't want me to. They thought he'd snap out of it better if he didn't see any of us for a while. They're probably right. I got weekly reports from them, though. I kept tabs on him. I didn't desert him up there. And is he better? Carrie asked, his voice nearly a whisper. That's what the docs told me. They said he was getting better every day. Might even be home by Christmas. Then, first thing this morning, I get a call. Donald's run away. Flew the coop. He shook his head sadly. Maybe he just decided he had enough. Maybe he's fine now, Carrie said. Maybe there's a Santa Claus and he really lives at the North Pole. You know that's not the way it works, Lieutenant Hart said bitterly. Maybe he's heading home, Carrie said, ignoring his father's words, caught up in his own swirling thoughts, struggling to keep from being buried under the weight of the horrifying story he had just been told. We'll get to see him, to talk to him. That'll be great, won't it? I don't know, his father said. I don't know. He glanced at his watch. Then he turned from the window and walked over to Carrie. Are you okay? I guess so. I still don't remember. It'll come back. You'll be able to face it then. You're stronger than you think. What an odd thing for his father to say. You're stronger than you think? Carrie had never thought of himself as strong, or weak. I just want you to be careful, his father said, pulling on his tie and fumbling to get it into a knot. His hands were shaking too badly. He gave up after 3 tries and tossed the tie to the floor. I gotta go. You know how to reach me if anything happens. Yeah, sure. Do you think Donald will be here by... The hospital is 2 days away by car, Lieutenant Hart said at the door. It's upstate, near the border, so don't plan on having lunch with your brother. I'm not too sure he'd head here anyway. He may not. I thought I had to warn you. Warn him? Did Carrie really have to be warned that his own brother might show up? Is he dangerous, Dad? Carrie could hardly get the words out. Get to school, his father said, trying to sound more cheerful. We'll get through this, okay? We Harts always manage to muddle through somehow. His father couldn't bring himself to answer the question. Hey, where's Sean? Carrie suddenly realized his brother was missing. He's at his friend Larry's. I already talked to him this morning, before you woke up, Lieutenant Hart said. Lieutenant Hart pushed open the screen door and stepped out onto the gravel driveway. Carrie heard the crunch of his shoes on the stones as he trudged toward his patrol car. He ran to the door. Hey, Dad. Lieutenant Hart stopped at the door to the car and turned around. What? Dad, one more question. Shoot. He fumbled into his pants pocket for the keys. The girl who died, Donald's girlfriend, was her name? Amanda, his father said. He opened the door and climbed wearily into the patrol car. Chapter 10. Carrie turned the Mustang into the parking lot and slowly cruised down the row, looking for a place to squeeze in. The lot was nearly filled, even though it was only 8 o'clock, and he was forced to park in a little lot near the back of the stadium. He locked the door and walked quickly toward the gym, his sport jacket flapping in the strong October breeze, his tie squeezing his throat. Did anyone actually feel comfortable when they dressed up? What's the matter, Hart? Couldn't get a date? Someone yelled. He couldn't see who was calling to him, so he just kept walking. He saw Mandy waiting for him by the sidewalk at the edge of the parking lot. Hi, he called, waving, but she didn't seem to see him. He started to run, his new shoes slipping on the asphalt. She was wearing a long purple dress, glittery and very slinky. She held a white wrap, some kind of shawl, around her shoulders. Her blonde hair sparkled under the glow of the parking lot lamps. She spotted him, gave him a quick wave, and started to run toward him. Her shoes clicked on the ground as she ran. Other couples heading into the gym turned to stare at her. She was a little overdressed for a simple dance in the gym. "Mandy," he said. "Hi." She fell into his arms. "Sorry." She pulled herself upright. "I tripped." "I didn't mind," he said, trying to sound suave. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. Her lips felt hot and soft. She smiled at him, bright purple lips on her pale face. They started toward the gym. He could still feel the touch of her lips on his cheek. He wondered if she had left lipstick prints there. "Well, you found the school. Amazing," she said, taking his arm, pulling herself close to him, so close he could feel the warmth of her body. "Was I late? Am I late?" She was making him nervous. He decided he didn't mind. "It's never too late," she whispered, putting her lips against his ear, sending chills down his body. He opened the gym door and handed the tickets to Miss McCordy, who was seated at a card table just inside. "Two?" she asked. She tore the tickets in half and motioned them to go in. She didn't expect an answer. "Golly gee, a real school dance," Mandy said sarcastically. But then her expression softened, and she looked to Carrie like a little girl. "It's been so long," she said softly. The theme of the dance was fall, and the gym was decorated appropriately with large construction paper leaves of orange and brown toppling down the walls, paper pumpkins and apples floating from the ceiling, orange and black Halloween balloons, and a mural showing a football player in a Panther uniform kicking a giant football on which appeared the words, "Kill 'em Panthers." This reminder made Carrie stop short, and he quickly looked around the crowded gym to see if any of his former teammates were in attendance. He couldn't really see. The lights had been turned low. Orange and blue spotlights streaked the room with darting dim light. The dancers and hangers-on were gray and black shadows in the swirling spotlights. "Do you like my dress?" He remembered Mandy, turned to look at her. She pulled back the white wrap that covered her dress, revealing how low-cut her purple gown was. "Wow. Why, Carrie, you're easily impressed," she said, laughing at his wide-eyed expression. "No, I'd better put this back on," Mandy said in a teasing voice, and wrapped the white shawl tightly around herself again. "I wouldn't want you to go to berserk or anything," she said, "at least not until later." "It's a very pretty dress," Carrie managed to say. She was stacked, but somehow it was all wrong. That body on that innocent face, that dress, it didn't really seem to fit her at all. It was almost as if she was wearing someone else's dress, someone else's body. "I'm glad you like it," she said coyly. Someone bumped Carrie hard from behind. His heart leaped. He hadn't thought. Of course the football players would be here tonight. Of course he would be easy prey for those goons again. He spun around, ready to fight. "Hey, how's it going?" "Josh. Hi. This is Mandy. Mandy, Josh." "I'm Josh," Josh said, staring at Mandy's dress. "You must be Josh," Mandy said. "I must be if Carrie says so," Josh said. "Are all your friends this boring?" Mandy asked Carrie. "No, only Josh," Carrie said. "Hey, thanks a lot, man," Josh said. "You want to know boring, Mandy? You just hang around with this guy." Josh laughed. "I wish things were a little more boring," Carrie said suddenly, thinking he saw O'Brien and Malik walking toward him across the dance floor. "What?" Mandy asked, surprised. "Nothing," Carrie said. "It was two other guys. Got to cool it," he told himself. "They already beat the crap out of me. They're not going to want seconds right here on the dance floor tonight." Mandy took his hand in her cold little hand and squeezed it hard. She must have sensed that he was troubled by something. "Where's your date?" she asked Josh. "See, over by the wall. She's the one on her knees over there," Josh said, pointing. "I'd turn to prayer too if I had to go out with you," Carrie said. "No, she lost a contact," Josh said. "Not much chance of finding it in this light, but she doesn't have a replacement. Hey, your face looks better," he added, staring at Carrie as if he were some sort of lab specimen. "Better than what?" Mandy asked, and then laughed. "I seem to be outnumbered here," Carrie said. "Why don't we dance?" Mandy suggested, pulling him away. Were her hands always this freezing cold, or was she just really nervous around Carrie? "See you later," Josh said, "and then you're supposed to say, 'Not if I see you first.'" She pulled Carrie into the middle of the crowded floor, squeezing between dancers moving through the flickering dim lights, and began moving slowly to the music, still holding his hands tightly in hers, swaying softly, moving slowly even though their music was fast, some sort of salsa record with an insistent, repeating disco-type drum riff. "Your face is better," she called to him over the music. "It's the dark lights," he said, trying to follow her but finding it difficult since she wasn't keeping to the music. "You have a nice face," she said. Someone bumped the tone arm on the record player. It scratched through the salsa record. There was a short, silent pause. Then a ballad with slow, sexy rhythm started playing. She began to push Carrie back as they danced, back toward the wall containing the football player mural. Her eyes were closed, her dark lips spread in a wide smile, her face tilted up at his. Back. She guided him back. They began to dance well together, began to move together. Back to the wall. When they reached the wall, twisting shadows of dancing couples darting and flickering on the crudely painted mural, she pushed him gently until his back was against the mural. Then she put her hands on the back of his neck, pulled his head down, and raised her purple lips up to meet his. He was so surprised, he gasped. Her lips were hot and soft, and she pushed them against his, harder and harder. At first, he tried to return the kiss, but as she pressed harder, her teeth hungrily pushing against his lips, he tried to back away, to end the kiss, and to catch his breath. But she held him in a firm grip, her cold hands tight on the back of his neck. Her kiss, as she pushed against him, became painful. It wasn't a kiss, it was an attack. Her teeth dug harder against him, her tongue pushed against his. Finally, she sighed and retreated. He took a deep breath. Before he could say anything, she pulled his head down to her mouth again. She whispered into his ear, her breath hot, her lips brushing his ear as she spoke. "Sorry, Carrie. Sometimes I'm a little impulsive." She backed away and let go of his head. Her mouth formed a shy smile. She looked embarrassed. She whispered, "It was nice," turned and ran onto the dance floor, disappearing into the swaying shadows of dancers. Carrie started after her, but stopped. He leaned back against the wall. He put a hand up to his throbbing lips. His lips were bleeding. He looked for her, bumping into dancers who gave him annoyed looks, tripping over feet, searching the shadows formed by the revolving lights. Had she left the gym? Was she coming back? "Hey man, she's a fox," Josh called to him. Jessie, his date, hadn't found her contact. She was dancing with one eye squinted. She squinted at Carrie in greeting. "You noticed," Carrie called, trying to sound nonchalant, hoping that Josh wouldn't ask where Mandy was. "Where's Mandy anyway?" Josh called. He was a terrible dancer. He looked like a duck when he danced, wobbling from side to side. "Girls' room," Carrie answered, searching the crowd. "Later," Josh said. He waddled off, Jessie squinting after him. Carrie made his way to the gym door. Miss McCordy was still sitting at the admissions table, guarding the door. She frowned when she saw Carrie approaching. "She doesn't like me," he thought. Then he thought, "She doesn't really like anybody." "Did my date go out this way?" he asked her. She frowned again. "The one in the purple dress?" "Yeah." "No, I haven't seen her. Maybe we should set up a booth for lost dates." Then she laughs. "Thanks." She was still laughing as Carrie disappeared back into the crowd. His lips still throbbed. He could still feel the hot touch of her lips against his ear as she whispered, her cold little hands on the back of his neck. "Sometimes I'm a little impulsive." He wanted to go off in a corner and think about her. Why did she kiss him like that? Why was it just a sudden impulse? Did she really like him? Or was she playing some sort of game with him? She was so quick-witted, so sophisticated, so together, but she was terribly overdressed, embarrassingly overdressed, and she didn't seem to be at all aware of it. And she was always clinging to him, always pulling him, always touching him. Was that because she was nervous? Or was she trying to make him nervous? It occurred to Carrie that maybe she was trying to be mysterious. If so, he thought, she was sure succeeding. He walked past the long refreshment table, with its big glass jugs of apple cider, pumpkin breads, raisin cookies, and other not terribly tempting items, most of which had been baked in home ec classes. No sign of her. Was she playing hide-and-seek with him? Was she embarrassed about the impulsive kiss? Then his eye caught someone slipping out of the gym through the door that led into the classroom corridor. Was that Mandy? He quickly made his way back through the crowded dance floor. He pushed open the double doors and stepped into the dark corridor. He heard footsteps not far away. Mandy? No reply. He looked down the dark row of lockers. Only a small light at the far end of the corridor had been turned on. They obviously didn't want kids leaving the gym and wandering around in the school. He heard footsteps in the direction of the light. "Mandy, is that you?" He tried again. Still, no reply. He began walking quickly toward the light. The empty corridor seemed eerie, even though it was so familiar. Without lights, without kids clattering their lockers, talking and shouting, It seemed like a tunnel of weird shadows and misplaced echoes. His footsteps sounded thunderous, clicking against the floor, echoing off the metal lockers. "Mandy?" His voice was a loud whisper. At the light, he stopped. He heard voices to the right. It was too dark to see who it was, so he started toward the voices. "Mandy?" "Hey, Hart." Two figures emerged in the dark corridor, Malik and O'Brien. "Hey, Hart, wait up." They began running toward him. He turned and ran the other way. If only he had stayed in the gym, they wouldn't have tried any rough stuff surrounded by hundreds of dancers and the teachers. But now he was easy prey, alone in the dark, empty hallway, no one around. "Hart, stop!" He ran as fast as he could, but they were narrowing the gap. Weren't these two guys ever apart, he thought? Had they come to the dance together? Despite his fear, he smiled as he ran. He pictured them dancing together, a slow dance, cheek to cheek. Give it up, Hart. If he kept running straight, they'd catch up with him in a few seconds. He saw the double cafeteria doors up ahead to the left. If he could get into the dark cafeteria, he could hide under a table or in the kitchen. He'd stand a tiny chance of getting away from them. His heart pounding, he stopped at the double doors, turned quickly to see that his pursuers were less than 100 yards behind him, and heaved his shoulder into the cafeteria doors. They were locked. "No!" he cried aloud. Hart, you moron!" He lunged for the stairway across from the cafeteria, practically flung himself down the tile steps, stumbling, his new shoes slipping, groping down the rail. He landed hard on his feet in the basement, which was darker than the other hallway. Gasping for breath, he ran. The maintenance room was straight ahead. He could duck inside. There'd be plenty of places to hide if the door wasn't locked. He heard their footsteps on the stairs. They were right behind him. A dim light shone through the small round window in the door to the maintenance room. He pushed at the door. Locked. He could feel the dread tightening his stomach, tightening his neck muscles. He pressed himself flat against the narrow recess in front of the door. Maybe Malik and O'Brien would run right past him, and he could get back upstairs to the safety of the crowded gym. He tried to hold his breath. He tried to think invisible thoughts. "Hart, you chicken." "Hey, Malik, where is he?" O'Brien called. "Now, wait a minute," Carey started, raising his fist. "Malik, over there," O'Brien called, looming over Carey in the dark. Malik came lumbering over. They stood side by side, smiling at Carey as they closed in on him. Chapter 11. O'Brien pressed a big fist against Carey's chest, pinning him to the door. Carey looked into their smiling faces, reflected in the dim light. "This can't be happening to me," he told himself. "I'm not going to get creamed again by these goons." "Hey, Hart, cool it," O'Brien said, shaking his head. "Yeah, cool it," Malik repeated. "We owe you an apology," O'Brien said. "What?" Carey's voice was a squeak. "You heard me," O'Brien said, loosening his grip on Carey's chest, his beefy face floating ominously in the dim yellow light. "It was all a misunderstanding," Malik said. "We saw Sal today, at the hospital. He set us straight." Carey was still breathing too hard to talk. What were they saying? The words weren't making sense to him. "How's Sal?" he finally managed to say. "He's doing better," O'Brien said. "It ain't been a picnic, but he'll be okay." "Good," Carey uttered, trying to stop the two faces from floating in front of him. "That's good." "Sal said the whole thing was an accident," Malik said. "He said you fell on him 'cause you couldn't stop. He don't blame you," O'Brien added. "He saw the whole thing. He said you didn't do it on purpose." "Of course not," Carey said, brightening. But then he had a shudder of horror. Was this another one of his daydreams? Was he imagining this whole scene? Would he blink open his eyes in a second and find them ready to pound the life out of him again, leaving him a pile of pulp for the janitor to clean up on Monday morning? Carey blinked. He opened his eyes. "Anyway," Malik said, "no hard feelings." He stuck out a meaty hand for Carey to shake. Carey took his hand. Then he shook O'Brien's hand. "No hard feelings," O'Brien said. "Hey, you're still a little puke," Malik said, tapping Carey hard on the knot of his tie. "But we wanted to set the record straight." They turned and walked off into the darkness. Carey waited, listened to hear them climb the stairs. "What a dork," he heard O'Brien say. He heard them both laughing. Their laughter and the footsteps grew fainter, then faded to silence. Carey stood in the dark doorway for a few more minutes, getting himself together. He began to feel pretty good. He realized that word would get around about what Sal had said, about how it was all an accident. Maybe people would start talking to him again. Start treating him as if he didn't have the bubonic plague, and the pranks would stop, and no more late-night threatening phone calls. Okay, Carrie called out to no one. He walked to the stairway and began climbing the stairs 2 at a time. He could hear the music from the gym, pounding drums, loud saxophones. Mandy. He had almost forgotten about her. He had to find her. He wanted to tell her what had happened, how good he felt. He wanted to dance. He wanted to shout. Maybe they could leave the dance and go be impulsive somewhere together. He pushed open the door to the gym and was assaulted by a wave of heat and noise, by twirling purple lights, weaving and swaying dancers, a roar of talk and laughter. Hey, Mandy! There she was, standing by herself at the end of the refreshment table, a cup of cider in her hand. Mandy, where'd you go? Never mind that. Where'd you go? I've been looking all over for you. She took his arm. Her hands felt warm for the first time. Want some cider? It's pretty good if you like cider. I thought maybe you would run away. You wouldn't run away. Would you, Carrie? You like me, don't you? She was talking a mile a minute. Why was she so worked up? He was the one who was excited. 2 of the Panthers just apologized to me, he told her, putting his arm around her waist. She pulled away out of his grasp. What? Sal told them it was all a mistake, so they apologized. I'm not the school villain anymore. That's nice, she said, looking at him as if he were speaking another language. I never thought you were a villain, she said, returning her kittenish voice and resting her head on his shoulder for just a second. He was suddenly very thirsty. He poured a cup of cider, then another. It was sweet and cold. He smiled at Mandy, who returned his smile with a devilish one of her own, a wisp of blonde hair floating gently down her pale forehead. Let's dance, she said, pulling him with both hands. I don't want you to run away again, do you hear? Carrie smiled and followed her onto the crowded floor. It seemed to him that she had it all backward. It was she who had run away, but he didn't feel like arguing with her. The music was soft and slow, an old Carpenter's record they always played at the dances. We've only just begun, and she felt warm and small pressed against him. Warm, small, and exciting. They danced a lot without talking much. The evening passed quickly. They were playing The Last Dance, a Donna Summer record, and then the bright gym lights were turned on, and the dance was over. Mandy put her arm around his waist as they made their way through the exit to the parking lot. Josh gave Carrie a thumbs-up sign from across the gym. Carrie wanted to talk to Josh, to tell him about the apologies from O'Brien and Malik. Josh would be as surprised as Carrie, but he couldn't get over to Josh, and he lost him in the crowd of kids pushing their way through the single narrow exit. The cold air hit their faces as they stepped outside. It was cold enough for a frost. Carrie hoped the Mustang would start. It was even more finicky in cold weather. Mandy grinned up at him. What's so funny? He asked, pulling her close. Nothing. Just thinking, she said coyly. Thinking? That can be dangerous, he said. Where's the car? She asked. I had to park it in front of my house. I couldn't find a place down here. It's a short walk, 5 or 6 miles, uphill. You don't mind, do you? She laughed and shook her head. You're funny, she said quietly. She gave his hand a hard squeeze. Sorry you didn't get to talk to Josh more, he said. He's very funny. He's the funniest guy I know. How long have you been friends? She asked, her breath smoking in the cold air. She pulled the white shawl around her shoulders. It really wasn't warm enough for the cold night. I'll find a way to keep her warm, Carrie thought. It's funny, he thought. He was walking along with her, talking about Josh, but he was thinking about sex. He decided that wasn't strange at all. That's what he always did when he was with a girl. He talked about some subject or another, and then thought about sex. He wondered if Mandy was doing the same thing. He hoped she was. We've walked 6 miles. Where's the car? She asked. It's right here, he said. He stopped. His mouth dropped open. Oh no. He shook his head. No, no, no. This can't be happening. The tires on the Mustang were slashed to ribbons, all 4 of them. Pieces of rubber lay strewn across the aisle of the parking lot. Someone had slashed the tires, and slashed at them until pieces had been torn clear off. Mandy stared at the car, which looked so weird resting at such a low angle. Then she screamed and buried her head in Carrie's shoulder. Oh my God, Carrie, she said, her voice shaking. This is getting scary. Chapter 12. I can't bear to look at it, Mandy cried, burying her head in Carrie's shoulder. It's so vicious. Carrie was so upset and surprised by the sight of the shredded rubber, he hadn't noticed that the windshield and front side windows had been shattered. A giant, spreading spiderweb of cracks covered the windshield, illuminated by the stadium light. Triangles and squares of broken glass lay strewn across both sides of the car. Vicious was the right word. The word sent a sudden chill down his body. He shuddered. He looked around the darkening parking lot. The last cars were pulling away. Was the person who had done this to his car waiting around somewhere nearby, watching gleefully, feeling happy and satisfied, gloating over another successful attack on the well-being of Carrie Hart? "Someone must hate you so much," Mandy said. She was so terrified by the sight of the battered car, she didn't realize that her words were scaring him even more. "I'll get you home and then deal with the car," he said, his arm around her. He was shivering even though she was pressed against him. He made a conscious effort to stop shaking, then gave up when he saw that he couldn't stop, that his shivers were caused by fear, not cold. He heard a scrabbling sound in the bushes at the side of the stadium wall. He peered into the darkness toward the sound. Was someone there? Was someone waiting for him, watching his every move? As he stared, shivering at the unmoving bushes, someone grabbed him from behind. He spun around. His throat had tightened. He couldn't breathe. "Josh!" he managed to get out. "Didn't scare you, did I?" Josh said. Jesse, his date, still squinting, giggled. Then they saw the Mustang. "Aw, man," Josh said. "Bad parking job." "It isn't funny," Mandy said sharply. "She's right, Josh," Jesse said quickly. "Carrie, this is awful." Josh got very quiet. He was thinking hard. Carrie realized that Josh knew all about the car accident the year before. Maybe he was thinking about that, seeing Carrie's car all smashed like this. Of course, he wouldn't mention it if he was thinking about it. "Do you think O'Brien and Malik did this?" Josh asked. "Those jerks would do anything if they thought—" "No," Carrie said quietly, trying not to let them see how badly he was shivering. "They didn't do it. They apologized to me about last Sunday. Sal told them that what happened to him was an accident." "They apologized? This is a weird evening." "Why don't we give you both a lift home?" Jesse suggested. "Yeah," Carrie agreed quickly. He had to sit down. He had to get out of that dark lot, away from the mutilated car. "Good idea," Josh repeated, his mind elsewhere. "No," Mandy said suddenly. "No," she repeated, so loudly that it startled everyone. "That's okay, really. There's the bus. I'll just take the bus." She began running toward the bus stop, waving to the driver to stop. "Hey, Mandy," Carrie called after her. "I'll call you. Night," she called back. She was running at top speed across the parking lot to the bus. "No, wait." Carrie started running after her, but she jumped into the bus and it pulled away. He watched her standing in the aisle even though she was the only passenger. He stood watching until the bus became two red taillights against the darkness and then faded completely from view. "That's strange," he said with a shrug, walking quickly back to Josh and Jesse. "Was it something I said?" Josh asked. Jesse gave him a poke in the ribs. "Stop it, Josh." "She was very upset about this," Carrie said, gesturing to his pitiful-looking wreck of a car. "I guess she just wanted to get away from it." "Right," Josh agreed, a little too quickly. Why had Mandy run off like that, Carrie wondered. She really had seemed more frightened and upset than he was. So why didn't she want to ride home in the safety of Josh's car, among friends? The three of them crossed the empty parking lot to Josh's car, his father's new Oldsmobile Cutlass. "Who would want to do a thing like that to you, Carrie?" Jessie asked, her hands pushed tightly into the pockets of her large brown coat. "Only about 300 kids that I can think of," Josh said, refusing to be grim despite Jessie's pokes and dirty looks. "But Sal explained to O'Brien and Malik that," Carrie began, his voice coming out a whine, his body shivering non-stop now. "He didn't explain to everyone in school," Josh said, starting up the car. "This wasn't a typical prank," Jessie said, her analytical mind working hard. Jessie was a science freak, and she approached every problem, everything that happened in her life, with the thoroughness of a scientist. "This seems to be the work of a crazy person." "Jessie, stop," Josh said heatedly. "A crazy person? A crazy person." The words repeated in Carrie's mind. Crazy? Donald. Donald was crazy. At least he was in a place for crazy people. Only he had escaped. Would his own brother be out there now plotting against him, lying in wait for him, attacking his car, ready to attack him? No, not Donald. Why would he even think such a thing? "I'm really losing it," Carrie said aloud. "Stay cool," Josh said. I'll take you home so you can call your dad. At least when you call the police, you know they'll come running." "I don't get that," Jessie said. She had just started at Revere. She didn't know Carrie's dad was a cop. As Josh explained it to her, Carrie kept thinking about Donald. He had asked his father if he had any reason to be afraid of Donald. His father hadn't answered him. If only he could remember what had happened, the accident, the girl. But he couldn't. He could conjure up a flash of headlights, a screech of brakes, a scream, a cry of pain. That was a little more than before, but that was all. And now, a year later, he was riding through the darkness, shivering uncontrollably, wondering if Donald, his best friend, his idol, had reason to come after him, to attack. It was too insane. "Here we are," Josh said, stirring Carrie from his troubled thoughts. "Hey, you're home." Carrie shook his head. "Sorry." "Want us to come in with you?" Jessie asked. "No," Carrie answered quickly. "No, I'll be fine, really." Would he be fine? Was someone waiting here in the bushes, waiting by the side of the house, waiting to grab him when he stepped out of the car? Stop it, he told himself. Just stop it, right now. "Thanks for the lift," he said, trying to disguise the quivering of his voice, the shaking of his entire body. He knew he'd be okay once he got inside. "I'll be fine. I'll call you tomorrow, Josh." "Yeah," Josh said, yawning. "If there's anything I can do to help." "Thanks," Carrie said, climbing out of the car. He wanted to run inside the house as fast as he could, but he walked deliberately, slowly up to the front stoop, and waved to them as they backed down into the sloping street, and then unlocked the door with a shaking hand, and pulled himself quickly inside. He threw his coat on the floor and walked straight to the bathroom, where he was sick for a long time, violently, painfully sick. When he was finished, the trembling seemed to have stopped. He washed his face for a long time. He felt a little better, tired, but better. He walked quickly into the kitchen and turned on the light. Sean had been there and left. There were torn slices of bologna and Swiss cheese on the table, a used plate with bread crusts, spilled potato chips, and a half-empty glass of Coke. He frowned at Sean's sloppiness. He felt suddenly lightheaded. He guessed it was from vomiting so hard. He sat down on a kitchen chair until the dizziness passed. His mouth tasted sour. He thought he might be sick again. He picked up the kitchen phone receiver. He hoped his dad could come home right away. He'd be angry and upset about the car, but Carrie would be real glad to see him anyway. There was no dial tone, just silence. Had someone cut the line? "Stop it, Carrie," he told himself. "Stop this paranoid craziness. You've got to." Still silence. No dial tone. "Hello?" he said to the silence. "Hello? Carrie?" A voice answered back. Someone was on the line. "Yes?" "Carrie, I'm going to break every bone in your body. Every bone will crack. Every bone will bend and break." The voice was harsh, filled with venom. "Sharon, don't you know that—" But he suddenly knew it wasn't Sharon. He realized it wasn't her voice. Couldn't be her voice. "You will die, Carrie." The voice continued, machine-like, all hatred and menace. "First you will suffer. Soon, I promise. First the bones will break. Smash. Smash, just like your car. Then you will die." She hung up. She knew about the car. Whoever it was knew about the slashed tires and battered windows. And it wasn't Sharon. He knew now that it wasn't. He could hear that it wasn't. The voice was familiar, though. He realized that it was a voice he had known. Was it a voice from his childhood? A voice from his recent past? From the year he couldn't remember? He knew he was going to be violently ill again, too. He dialed the police station, the special number that only families could use. A few seconds later, his dad was on the line. "Dad, it's Carrie. I think you'd better come home." His father seemed about to explode when Carrie told him about the car, but seeing Carrie pale and shaking, he stifled the outburst before it began, and immediately assumed a professional attitude. "There probably aren't any prints worth dusting for, but I'll have Wainwright give it a try in the morning," he said in his Renko drawl. Carrie was relieved that his father had decided to play the role of police officer rather than outraged parent. He was often surprised by how considerate his father, normally a gruff and self-interested person, could be toward him. But then it suddenly dawned on Carrie that his father had been considerate of his feelings for an entire year, careful of every word he said, always on guard not to start anything, or say anything that would disturb his son or his son's memory. No wonder his father looked so much older. No wonder he had spent so much time at home. Being with Carrie was a constant strain. "It could have been someone on the football team," Carrie said, fighting the shakes. His father said, eyeing him thoughtfully. Let's talk about it in the morning. I think you've had enough for one night. We'll get the car towed over to O'Malley's for an estimate. Then we can talk. Okay? Carrie smiled. Sure. He started toward the stairway to his room. The phone rang. He and his father stared at each other. The phone rang again. Dad, could you answer it? I've been getting some weird calls. I'm not surprised with your friends. What other kind of calls could you get? It was a feeble attempt at humor, but Carrie appreciated it. His father picked up the kitchen phone. Hello? He said. Hello? He said, sounding annoyed. Yeah, he's here. Are you one of his weird callers? Carrie cringed. Maybe having his dad answer was a bad idea. His father handed him the phone. Someone named Mandy, he said. Said she was your date tonight. She doesn't sound too weird to me. I'll take it upstairs. Night, Dad. Thanks. His legs felt weak as he climbed the stairs. He picked up the phone and carried it over to the bed. Hello? He couldn't keep the weariness from his voice. I'm insulted, Mandy said, sounding kittenish. Why? Your father said I wasn't weird. That's only because he hasn't met you, Carrie said. They both laughed. I'm sorry I ran off like that. That must have seemed pretty weird, Mandy said. But I just had to get away. It was so ugly. Yeah, Carrie said. I had a nice time. I had fun with you. Me too, he said. He wanted to get under the covers. Was your dad mad about the car? Of course. But he's a cop, so he skipped being mad and went right into plans for the investigation, Carrie said. Want to get together tomorrow? She asked. I didn't get to give you your goodnight kiss, she giggled. Was she teasing him? If it was going to be anything like the painful kiss she had given him in the gym, he'd just as soon skip it, Carrie decided. His hand went up to his lip, which was still swollen and painful. Tomorrow is Monday. But there's no school, she said quickly. Teacher's meeting. Come on, meet me in the afternoon. Meet me at that coffee shop a few blocks from the school. You know, with the striped awning and the big ice cream cone on the window. Phil's? Yeah, Phil's. Meet me there at 3. I'd really like to talk to you. Okay, good, he said. What a switch. A girl was pleading with him to meet her. Good night, Carrie, she whispered. Wow, she was sexy. You know, I think pretty soon you and I are going to have something really special going. And she hung up before he could say a word. I hear you got the car creamed. That was Sean's greeting at breakfast the next morning. Shut up, Sean, their father said, standing over a skillet of scrambled eggs. You're up early, Carrie said to his brother, who was seated at the kitchen table in pajama top and underpants. It was a mistake, Sean muttered. I forgot there was no school. We'll probably go right back to bed after breakfast, Lieutenant Hart said, stirring the eggs vigorously. So vigorously a large chunk of them fell out of the pan and onto the stove. How do you know? Sean said. Breakfast was spent avoiding the topic of what had happened. After breakfast, Lieutenant Hart handed Carrie a large manila envelope. Insurance forms, he said. I want you to deliver them for me to the insurance office. Do it this morning, okay? It's over on Grand Street, you know, in the Civic Center. You don't want me to come with you to look at the car? No, I think I know how to look at a car. Take the forms. I'll call you later to see how you're doing. He looked deeply into Carrie's eyes as if looking for answers to all kinds of deep problems, then quickly looked away. Carrie started towards the stairs. Hey, Dad? Yeah? You don't think that Donald wrecked the car? Lieutenant Hart looked more troubled than surprised by the suggestion. Carrie, what makes you say that? I don't know. Oh, I thought he caught himself. After all this time, Carrie was realizing how careful his father always was around him, as if Carrie was a mental patient too. For some reason that thought stayed with him as he dressed, left the house, and caught the bus that would take him across town to the Civic Center. The thought was still circling his head, along with thoughts of Mandy, nice thoughts about Mandy. After he had dropped off the envelope for his father, he was walking up Grand Street, his hands in his pockets, not really noticing what was in the store windows, and he bumped into someone. Oh, hey, Carrie, it's you. Why don't you watch where you're going? Margot, I don't believe it. I'm sorry. Margot Fremont smiled at him. She looked the same except her hair was shorter. Her smile quickly faded. You look awful. An accident, he said. His choice of words seemed to startle her. She jumped a little. Of course, she knew all about his accident the year before, too. Everyone knew. Everyone knew but Carrie. I got into a little fight. It's not like you, she said, grinning. How are things at Revere? Do they miss me? That's all anyone talks about, Carrie said. When will Margot come back and pay us a visit? The place isn't the same. It's fallen apart. The walls are crumbling. Everything since you left. I'm at Worthing Hill now, she said, rolling her eyes. I'm learning how to be snooty. Snooty 101. That's my first course. You learn to talk through your teeth without moving your jaw. You always were kind of preppy, Margot. Admit it. She put her nose in the air. Preppy? We don't associate with preppies. They're so common, don't you know? Listen, he said, suddenly remembering that he wanted to thank her. Mandy is terrific. What? Mandy, she's really great, he said. I'm glad to hear it, Margot said. For some reason, she was being sarcastic. Who the hell's Mandy? Come on, Margot, you know. The girl you fixed me up with, the blind date. That was really nice of you. I tried to call you, but you weren't home. Mandy? Mandy who? You're putting me on, right? Carrie, somebody's putting you on, but honey, it ain't me. You don't know Mandy Lawrence? She shook her head to be more emphatic. You didn't fix me up with a blind date? Carrie, if your voice gets any higher, I'll have to rent a hot air balloon and fly up to hear you. No, I'm not. No, I don't. And no, I didn't. Carrie was absolutely speechless. Glad to hear she's great, Margot said sarcastically. Did she really call you up and say that I told her to? I think so, Carrie said, his mind trying to recapture that first conversation. I was sure she said that you... Well, maybe she thought she knew me or something. I don't know. Maybe you mixed me up with somebody else, although I don't really see how it would be possible. Carrie didn't hear a word she was saying. There was something very strange about this. Mandy had definitely said it was Margot. More than once. Great seeing you, Margot. Bye. He walked down the street, his mind spinning. Yeah, sure. It's great seeing you too, Margot called after him. She shook her head and headed off in the other direction. Carrie was glad he was meeting Mandy in a few hours. He had to confront her with this. He had to find out the truth. For too long, he decided. The truth was something he had shut away in a forgotten corner of his brain. He made up his mind he was not going to do that anymore. He was going to confront the truth, no matter how much pain it caused, no matter what the danger was. He waited for an hour and a half at Phil's, but Mandy never showed up.